Just want to remind you guys, this episode is presented by Prize Picks. Download the app today. Use the code JUICE to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. All right, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Bring the Juice. I want to welcome back our good friend, Alex from Hail Mary Sports. Back at it again. Alex, we are getting one day closer to the draft, my friend. We're getting there. How are you doing?
Doing good. It's a little bit of the dead season for a draft, so I'm excited now to do like team-specific stuff, and appreciate you always having me on the show. It's always fun to be able to catch up and talk with you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know we did this around this time of year last year, talking about some potential good fits for the Indianapolis Colts, some of the best options for them.
Yeah.
So I wanted to kind of do that today. Just talk about, some of the best options for them at 14, potentially look at, okay, who would be some guys that might be worth trading up for Indy, or some guys that maybe if they choose to do the old Chris Ballard special and trade back, who would be some candidates there. So, Well, let's start, man, with just pick 14 itself, where the Colts sit right now, kind of smack dab right in the middle of everything. But, we see it all the time where certain players fall that people thought were going to go in the top 10. So you never know what's going to happen with the draft. There can be run on different positions all the time, but when you're looking at Indy right now, who are you looking at based off of maybe some of the perceived needs that we've talked about before?
Yeah.
What guys make the most sense for Indy there at pick 14? Say they stay there and they pick.
Yeah, so something that we kind of thought was almost a guarantee that he'd be there that's becoming a further and further dream is Tyler Warren. Like just the definition of reliability, tight end out of Penn State for those who are getting into the draft season. Literally just the definition of reliability. We talked about this before on our little mock draft. One of the best ways to help out your quarterback, especially if he's struggling with some inconsistencies, is give him somebody who is reliable, that even when they're having some processing difficulties, it's kind of like an always open kind of guy, and someone who could be an asset as a blocker as well, which would help out JT and the rest of the offense. So he's the dream. That's the dream, but it's especially with Kellen Moore going to New Orleans, starting to feel like a little bit more of a distant. I don't know if you want to talk about that right now, and then we'll go into another player, or do you want me just to bang them out?
Yeah, I mean, we could just talk about a few players and kind of dissect them a little bit more.
Yeah.
If there's anybody else that you think makes sense there,
I'll name a couple other ones. So. Okay. Obviously Malachi Starks has been in the news for kind of dipping down because, people have been overvaluing how much he played in the slot this past year, and that's why he had a dip in production. If you actually look at the pure deep safety / even the reps he's had in the box, which he wouldn't do in the NFL, but where he's not in the slot position, he's as good as what was advertised coming into the year. I do think people are extremely overvaluing the slot reps that he would not necessarily be taking here in Indy. So I think he's still an excellent option, even if the rumors are true and you have to trade back and, he's not viewed as a top guy anymore. We'll bleed that into the next section as well. And then technically speaking, you could go another edge rusher, or some people even talked about defensive interior early on. I would not venture the defensive interior this early based on how good the class is on day 2. And so, edge-wise, if you see maybe someone like James Pierce slipping, like Mykel Williams would fit a little bit more of the athletic and physical size profile that matches what you guys have, and then what Lou had over in Cincinnati, because James Pierce is obviously a little bit smaller. But those are kind of the 3 guys / 4 that I'd be primarily looking at. But again, 3 of those guys probably are trade back candidates based on the current news.
Yeah, that makes sense. And, it's going to be interesting, too, obviously, how they address free agency, because they have made such a major focus just in the ways that they have gone about, looking for their defensive coordinator. You see pretty much everybody outside of maybe one candidate that had a primary, defensive back focus at some point in their career, right? And obviously Lou has that as well, that DB background. And, the Colts talking about how, they went with youth the last couple of years and they've had mixed results and really need to add some fresh blood in there. So I'll be interested to see how they address, defensive back in free agency, whether that's going for a Javon Holland, for example, or there's a lot of other names, or, some veteran corners as well. And I know some other people have thrown out, a couple corners there. I know the guy out.
I forgot about Ben Morrison. Literally one of my top 5 guys in the class. I'm like, all right, well, shoot. Yeah. I was looking down my board at the 14 range, and I'm like, I
Yeah,
scrolled up.
I
I'm like,
know
shoot.
Daniel
Yeah.
Jeremiah had the Colts taking Barron, the corner out of Texas, as well.
Yeah.
There, I'm not sure how I feel about that one,
Yeah.
but that was kind of his first mock draft there.
Right.
And corner is a need, I
It
would
is.
say, but I'm curious to see how they address it because I do think they'd go more veteran that way because they do have a
Yeah.
couple young guys, but I'm
Yeah.
not sure.
So, I mean, like, honestly, if they're going to go corner, I would say that it would line up better with Ben Morrison. I feel like he's closer to Cam Taylor Britt's profile than what, I mean, again, Cam Taylor Britt also not necessarily creme de la creme, but I'm just talking about what Lou's used to over in Cincinnati. But when you look at Jahdae Barron, it is an off zone coverage corner. That's exactly the role he played there at Texas. Very rare that he was one-on-one-ing guys, did not use a ton of physicality. Great player, but I feel like he's one of those players who's going to be slipping out of the first. A lot of people have him super duper high, but he's just very specific, and he's very good, but he's just very specific. And when you look at the team as a whole, you look at Jalen Jones, and yes, technically Lou wasn't the DC when you have Jalen Jones and on top of that Juju Brents, but Jahdae Barron doesn't fit with the profiles of those guys. So are you going to basically be kicking out two of the players who I think actually have a viable future to be able to have somebody new who's sub 6 foot off zone corner? I don't think so. So I'd prefer to go similar style with someone who has at least 6 foot and then also has that physicality and man coverage ability, which is why Ben Morrison would be my corner for y'all early on.
Yeah, do you think that he slips because of that injury? Do you think that pushes him down, maybe late first round or early second or something like that?
See, the thing is, I do think it does happen. I don't think it should, but I also think that we're at that point in the draft cycle where people are being very unfair with the players they give criticism versus the ones they don't. Siobhan Revel, torn ACL, one translatable game in the past 2 years, and it was week 1 of 2023. All of a sudden, he's still like a lock in the first, but a player who is pretty much a lock top 15 is just like, nope, you had an injury in week 6. We don't care about you anymore. So yeah, kind of mind blowing that, but we'll see. Like, it'll just be very heavy on the medicals at the combine.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, well, going back to some of the guys that you had there, I don't think that edge is out of the realm of possibility. I really don't, because I look at it and I say, outside of Latu on the edge position, I mean, you have Kwity Paye, who's on a 5th-year option. He's never eclipsed 10 sacks. He's kind of been a disappointment in terms of that production. You have question marks with, Samson Ebukam. Will he be on the roster? Who knows? Colts could cut him and save $7.5 million or something. So he's coming off that torn Achilles, so that's a big deal at the age of 30. So he could be gone. Dayo Adangbo, who knows at this point if he's coming back or not.
Yeah.
And really outside of that, who do you have? And you don't really know who's going to be your long-term solution alongside a Latu moving forward, right? So that's kind of one of the things. Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm curious because obviously I know Lou likes 280-pounders. Adi Tamiwa Adebawore has done pretty much nothing in terms of impact on the defensive interior. What do you think about him potentially kicking to the edge?
I would be fine with it. I'd be open to that. I think he fits more of that edge profile, to be honest with you. I'm kind of surprised they haven't used him a ton. He really hasn't.
He ran like a 4.4 at 280?
Yeah.
I'm like,
he's insanely athletic.
What the hell? Yeah, okay.
I know.
I was curious.
Drafted him, and we kind of just forgot about him.
I know. My buddy asked me about him yesterday, and I'm like, damn, I haven't heard that name in a hot minute. So, okay, I'm glad that you think that's a potential option if in case they don't like to invest early.
Yeah, well, I just think there's a lot of contracts they've handed out on this defensive line, so I think it might make some sense for them to either cut ties with some of them and go get somebody that more, fits Lou's scheme a little bit more, or go and draft a guy, fairly early. I think that would make some sense for them to do that. So I would say that's not out of the realm of possibility, but I guess going back to, this is going to be the argument till the Colts make their pick, tight end or safety. I feel like that's going to be the two. Yeah. Malachi Starks or Tyler Warren are kind of the two names that are around the Colts right now.
Right.
And I guess I look at it and I say, I wouldn't be surprised at either, to be honest with you. Like, I see some guys that, could be worth, day 2 selections there at both positions, right? I think both of them have some guys that could make some sense for Indianapolis. But I guess I just look at the ways the Colts have, what they have communicated so far about where they believe their needs are. And I feel like, safety especially is a big need, a top need for them right now. So that's why I look at it and I say a guy like Malachi Starks makes so much sense there for what the Colts are trying to do, or adding a veteran. Again, free agency is going to change everything,
right?
right? So we don't know what we don't know right now, but I wouldn't be shocked at all. And I feel like the more I think about it and the more the Colts have said and their actions have said, it leads me to believe that DB might be the pick there.
Yeah. I mean, I assume we're going to be transitioning to the trade back talk, but I do love one safety in particular for him for when we get into that conversation.
As we said, guys, today's episode is sponsored by Prize Picks. Now, what is Prize Picks? Prize Picks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. Instead of battling against thousands of other players across platforms, you're basically picking 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you're choosing more or less on those stat projections to be able to watch those winnings roll in. It's very easy. Do you guys want to play along at some of Prize Picks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and UFC fighter Sugar Sean O'Malley? Well, if you guys sign up today, you can find the community plays under the promos tab of the app to view the entries of some of the biggest names on the platform and be a part of that as well. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000 just like that with NBA, NHL, and college basketball entries today on Prize Picks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. Like a lot of other things, guys, they also offer injury insurance, so your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. So if someone exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player projection won't count against you and the rest of your entry stays live. So it's great bounce back for that one. What I love about the app as well, guys, is it's not just sports like NBA, NHL, football, and tennis, and baseball and all these other things, but there's also a lot of others that go into it as well. If you like to place entries on video game situations like Call of Duty, CS2, Apex, if that's something that appeals to you, there's a wide variety of sports and video games and everything else that you can place entries on. And I love how expansive it is. Even just looking at the NBA, there's entries you can make with turnovers, with points. You can do combo deals, dunks, field goals attempted, all of these different things. So there's just so many different ways to make money off of these entries. Be sure to download the app today and use the code JUICE to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup.
Yeah, let's go there. Let's go talk about trade back here. Some trade back options for Indy.
Yeah.
Gosh, they do this all the time. So it wouldn't be shocking at all if the Colts would trade back here. Yeah. Somewhere around maybe early 20s or so. That would make some sense for them.
Yeah.
Even if it's late teens. I mean, I wouldn't mind that at all. Yeah. So who would be some of those guys falling within that range that you think would make some sense if Indy's like, hey, we want to recoup some draft capital, move back a little bit. We still like a lot of these guys. Who do you think would fit them in their either offense or defense really well?
Right. So we already mentioned Ben Morrison. Ben Morrison would be like a feisty, nice corner, especially if he does need some dev time, especially if you can move back multiple times, maybe acquire some picks, and then you can end up allowing him to grow because it's not as pressing of an issue. But the one player who I really love, because Lou loves someone who could be extremely rangy, great size, and great ball skills. That's Nick Ebenwari from South Carolina. I mean, he's been as high as top pick 5 in a recent mock draft. Again, it's CBS. Let's take that with a pinch of salt. But I mean, no disrespect, because they got Mike Renner there, so they have some really good analysts. But we all know the reputation at this point. But I digress. He is 6'3", 230, should be running the 4.3s. I mean, he is going to be a combine monster. But on top of that, he's not just a physical freak. He had 4 interceptions this past year, 2 of which went to the house, 1 of which ended up being called back because Kyle Kennard laid out Garrett Nussmeier. That's awesome. I mean, simply put, this dude is a pick 6 machine at 6'3", 230 with an insane high speed. So for Lou, when you're looking at a Jesse Bates for his system, and Nicky Ebenwari can literally play anywhere. He can play boundary corner if he wanted to. That flexibility is going to be insane. And maybe he will end up being, after the combine, someone who's mentioned as a top 15 pick. But for the time being, I think that would be like the creme de la creme option trading back. But I know that we like doing 3 guys. Like that.
Yeah, let's do it.
That's the notion. So thinking of the third guy, because I don't want to mention like another corner, because you could always toss in Siobhan Rebel in there, but I feel like that's going to be a little bit boring for this. If you want to get somebody who's really solid, who's going to fall, who's an extremely high floor, Nick Scorton all day. That's perfect for loose defense as well. You think about Miles Murphy, but better, or actually more applied to the NFL. That's going to be exactly what you're looking for. 6'4", 285. Dude's just so consistent and was supposed to be a top 5 pick coming out of Purdue. Transferred to Texas A&M, had a little bit of a sluggish start, and was still arguably, if I'm going to be honest, the best defensive player on that team. So, just a true leader of a defensive line with multiple high-end talents. To me, I think he's a perfect complement to Latu as well. Like both of them extremely high skill, and then both actually really solid weight.
Yeah, makes some sense. I'm curious, just because we're talking about some other tight ends, where do you have for example, like Colston Loveland?
Yeah.
Where would you have him going? Because I don't think he's going to be, I think I think he'll be available when the Colts pick at 14.
Yeah.
But how far back, if you say you're targeting him, for example, where would that make sense, like range wise?
Yeah. So the question is, obviously, it's going to be heavily dependent on who's going to be slipping and stuff, because we have all these storylines that go on behind the scenes that we'll never know, like medicals, personality, all that stuff. So there's always a chance that Colston goes higher than we expect, because certain players that we expect to go high don't. Or maybe Colston's just that good of a dude in the locker room. But I would worry that if it does get to the Broncos pick, there's going to be, or at least pick 19, like right near the Broncos pick, because that's where the Chargers could trade up. But the Broncos as well. Broncos, Sean Payton mentioned they wanted a joker, a tight end or running back that can be an elite route runner. Like, fits the bill. So I would say 18 range is where you can feel comfortable, because I think the Seahawks right there might be a maneuvering position to move up or back. So I think that's going to be right at that pivotal point where we might end up seeing Colston Loveland being that's his sweet spot, 18 to 22.
Okay, gotcha. So if they did not quite a full trade back into the 20s, he could still be an option there for them.
I mean, awesome. There's always the chance. The tight end class is pretty damn deep, to the point where maybe teams just don't feel the need to take a tight end that high. There's guys like Elijah Arroyo, Harold Fannin, to where, there is a chance where he could slip noticeably.
Absolutely. Well, I know this is probably not super likely, but I thought I'd mention it anyway, especially because you heard the rumors last year, the Colts trying to trade up to get Brock Bowers, and obviously it didn't happen. But if there was a scenario where the Colts could potentially trade up and actually make it happen this year, where do you think they'd look to trade up, and who do you think it'd be for? Or maybe a couple guys you think it could be for?
So if we're going, obviously a 2-part question. If we're going to go and rock the trade up for Tyler Warren, and you want to be safe about it, you have to go to 8. I don't think it's worth it. I don't think, just full transparency, I don't think it's worth the 2nd or 3rd round pick you have to use to move up for Warren. And I love Warren. I think he's a clear tight end 1 for what you're looking for. He is just built to be a rock solid tight end 1 in the NFL. But because I just don't trust Kellen Moore to pass on him. Kellen Moore is a tight end guru. He loves tight ends to death. So if you're wanting to guarantee that, that's the range that you have to move up. But if we're looking at, maybe Will Johnson begins to slip, you might want to start talking to the Saints, especially because they might be sitting at 9 and realize, well, if the Colts are going to move up for someone besides Tyler Warren, let's just say they're like, hey, we have our guy round 2, round 3, right? Let's just say maybe they fell in love with Harold Fannin, Elijah Arroyo. Then you could start talking about that. The Bears, of course, but I just would be worried about the Niners going best player available. It's kind of what they do. Robert Saleh would absolutely have a wet dream over, sorry for the graphics, but he would love Will Johnson. But if he ends up slipping the way that some people are saying that he might, I'd be terrified of Robert Saleh being the decision maker on what he loves in his defense and taking that opportunity away, because that'd be creme de la creme for this team, right? Ben Morrison, Will Johnson. So it is Warren and Johnson. Those are the guys who I would move up for. Outside of that, hell, you'd have to see Abdul Carter slip to legitimately justify the price of a move up.
Yeah, no doubt. It'd be interesting to see, man. It's so fascinating to me because from what we're talking about here in February to what's going to happen in a couple months in April, so much can change. It's wild. Guys we projected top 10, some guys
could
maybe
slip out
fall.
the first. Yeah.
You never know. So
they literally could. Yeah. I mean, also, I guess this is a point because I ended up testing this out a couple of weeks ago. Dallas is a prime team for a trade down. Like, especially if you see Ashton Genty go, like Tedro McMillan's off the board, which we've seen him start slipping some mocks recently. I don't know why, but I've seen 2 mocks in a row where he slips to 19, including Daniel Jeremiah's. I don't know if there's some inside information there, but assuming that those 2 go, like you're talking about a team like Denver that could be aggressive as well. Sean Payton, very aggressive in terms of his ownership. So if you are wanting to get Tyler Warren as well, you might have to still trade up, even if he slips. So it's just something to keep in mind.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to be fascinated to see how it works out, man. Yeah. And it's going to be such a fun time. But, man, I do appreciate you coming on, as always, Alex. Why don't you tell everybody, man, what have you been working on? What have been some of the stuff on your channel people can go check out?
Yeah, so I pretty much do everything draft related. I've been right now churning out 7-round mock drafts for specific teams. So Colts, you guys are going to be coming up. I've been doing 1 to 2 a day. So that's been a slog, but I mean, still, it's going to be probably by the end of this week. So I'm going to be excited to hear what you think about that as well. But everything draft related, I'm really going to be dropping a top 32 wide receivers video on Saturday, which is going to be probably an hour and a half to 2 hours long. Includes a game tape from, not game tape, but a game report from every single player as well, in case you want to get to know the class. But wide receiver, not really the biggest Colts thing on planet Earth. But yeah, I have some cool interviews that are coming into the show as well. Some other prospects that I'd love to be able to shout out. But, you know, if you love the draft, come hang out.
Awesome. Guys, we'll be sure to go check out his stuff. Always good stuff from Alex. But appreciate you coming on, man, and it's going to be interesting.
Of course.
So, awesome. Well, thank you again, and thank you, everybody, for tuning in. That'll do it for this one. Thanks, guys. As always, go Colts.
Later.